This is AMLS AmusingLuis Channel 28, available on your local YouTube provider. A quick thank you to our patrons.
How's it going, guys? My name is Lewis, and welcome to a brand new series called Discontinued Nostalgia. Might want to hire a graphic designer for an intro. This will be a series where I'll be exploring a variety of discontinued products from certain topics and present them to you in video format. For this first episode, I thought it would be cool to go through the defunct TV channels. While some channels have achieved infamy for their lineup, others have been forgotten due to bizarre reasons. Although I won't be able to cover every channel, I will highlight the ones I found most interesting. Side note, I won't be covering TV blocks, so no Jetix, no Fox Kids, no, I don't know, Vortex. Maybe for a future video. Anyways guys, if you like this first episode and want me to cover other topics, just let me know in the comments and we'll see what you guys want. Also stay tuned to the end of the video for an exciting announcement. Without further ado, this is episode 1 of Discontinued Nostalgia, TV Channels. Our first deep dive starts all the way back in the 1980s. During this time, comedy experienced a significant surge in popularity, largely attributed to stand-up specials that had aired on HBO. These specials would be responsible for catapulting the careers of beloved comedians of the time such as Bob Saget, Eddie Murphy, Robin Williams, Whoopi Goldberg, and many others. Art Bell, who was the director of development at the network, saw the potential of a 24/7 comedy channel and pitched the idea to the head of HBO, Michael Fuchs. Michael Fuchs. There was some opposition to this channel, believing that comedy is a much more difficult genre to deliver compared to other TV channels like sports or music, since comedy is subjective.
No, I got like 4 more in the chamber.
But they pursued it, and on November 15, 1989, the Comedy Channel was launched. The Comedy Channel's format involved various hosts showcasing acts of stand-up comedians, similar to how MTV had music videos and video jockeys. This format would later be reformatted to a TV show named Short Attention Span Theater, hosted by Patty Rosenberg and Jon Stewart. Yes, that Jon Stewart. The network had also featured original programming like Mystery Science Theater 3000 and Onion World with Rich Hall. With this amount of content, it seemed like the channel was gonna thrive for sure. Yet Viacom also saw the potential in a comedy channel, and 5 months later, they would launch HA TV Comedy Network.
Jump.
Unlike the Comedy Channel, HA struggled with gaining exposure and needed an exciting schedule, as they mainly relied on syndicated reruns of comedy shows from the 1950s through the 1970s, such as The Abbott and Costello Show and I Love Lucy. It also aired Saturday Night Live reruns, making it the only channel to do so, huge deal at the time. The network wasn't even its own 24/7 channel, as it had to share channel space with VH1 under a channel share agreement on select cable providers, making it even harder to gain traction. The competition between the two would be short-lived, as both networks were struggling to meet ends, leading Time Warner and Viacom to compromise and form Comedy Partners Inc., a joint venture that merged the Comedy Channel and HA to create CTV, the Comedy Network. This will later be renamed to the more iconic Comedy Central just 2 months later. Comedy Partners Inc. remained a 50-50 venture between the two parties until 2003 when Viacom purchased Time Warner's stake. It's honestly interesting knowing that despite these two networks being neck and neck with Nick and Cartoon Network, they were essentially in bed together this entire time because of Comedy Central, so, the more you know.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.
In the early days of broadcast television, options for network selection were limited. The only major names you had were CBS, NBC, and ABC. But in 1952, the Ford Foundation established the Educational Television and Radio Center, later changed to National Educational Television. Before PBS even existed, NET once held the crown as the leader in educational programming. Initially, it served as a middleman, facilitating the exchange and distribution of programs made by local stations, and then distributing them to other stations. By the spring of 1954, NET would become a network, launching with just 5 hours of educational content a week that provided science shows, fine art programs, discussions on public affairs, and most notably, children's television. This would be the home to some of the most iconic programs like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street. By the early 1960s, NET would expand to 10 hours a week and start expanding in several parts of the nation. Things would get better when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967, which led to the creation of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This was meant to help fund public television and radio. While the funding made it much easier to create more programming, this also meant that NET had to meet a certain criteria, a criteria that they pretty much ignored, and is possibly the reason for their demise. Sort of, I think. Let me explain. One of NET's most highly acclaimed yet controversial shows would be NET Journal and Public Broadcast Laboratory. These were more documentary-based shows that discussed heavier public affairs, including racism, critical takes on the Nixon administration, and the handling of the Vietnam War. It was these programs that infuriated Nixon, and because of that, they threatened to slash funding for public broadcasting from $20 million to $10 million. This, however, was swiftly dismissed when the GigaChad himself, Mr. Rogers, testified to Senator John Pastor and verbally murdered him with words of kindness in just 7 minutes. Like, just watching this is absolutely insane, because at the beginning, Senator Pastor had no idea who this guy was, and he seemed kind of smug about it. But towards the end, he had completely changed his demeanor, and I don't know, it's just so wholesome. Like go watch the video for yourself and you'll see what I mean. While Mr. Rogers just nonchalantly saved public television, NET will still ignore precautions and continue airing their documentaries. This might have been a fatal move, as I believe that the disregard from the CPB led to them creating the Public Broadcasting Service in 1969. Slowly, the CPB would decrease funding for NET over the next 2 to 3 years, and the Ford Foundation had also threatened to pull off funding unless they were to neutralize themselves and merge with WNDT, a New Jersey-based TV station. With really not a lot of options left, NET would end up merging with WNDT and become WNET Channel 13 in October of 1970, resulting in NET ceasing operations and making PBS the new flagship fourth network. Many of NET's programs would move on to PBS, including those with the NET name, until they were cancelled in 1972. Based on everything I just read researching this topic, it seemed like NET's demise was the result of sabotage on both sides involved. Before PBS became a network, there were these memorandums exchanged in late 1969 between Nixon's aide Peter Flanagan and White House staff assistant Clay Whitehead, talking to CPB President John Macy and Chairman of the Board Frank Pace, suggesting an increase of funds to make new programming facilities to replace NET, as well as decrease funding for the network until they had reached zero, primarily so that PBS, a more government-dependent network, can be the new face of public broadcasting. Considering that NET was spending its funding on current anti-administration content and just doing it without the regard from the CPB and the Nixon administration, I mean, I could see why they did that. I'm not saying it's right, but I guess he who pays the piper calls the tune. While NET is mostly forgotten about, the network has pioneered educational broadcasting and has challenged norms by presenting thought-provoking content on social issues that only got a little spotlight. Oh yeah, they also introduced the world to Mr. Rogers, so yeah, we salute you.
Now it pays to play. GSN Game Lounge delivers the best of new and favorite interactive games, like The Jewel and Uno.
This next entry is truly a nostalgic one for me. If you grew up with DirecTV, you definitely remember Game Lounge. This was an interactive cable channel that offered a rotational assortment of games that could be played with your remote. The channel was first announced in May of 2007 when a UK-based software company named Denki partnered up with DirecTV to produce 9 games for the service, to which that number would increase over time. Game Lounge would feature casual games such as Monopoly, Uno, Bejeweled, as well as licensed games that featured characters from Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and Mattel. The way you control the game was by using the arrow and color buttons to perform the actions on the remote. Because of these limitations, the games were not cutting edge, but that didn't mean that they weren't fun. While the channel was free to play, it was only available through free trials. The only way you could finish the game was if you paid for a subscription, which was either $5.95 a month or $1.95 a day. Occasionally, DirecTV would offer free weekends, and let me tell you, when they did that, I would stay glued to my TV for hours just playing Tumble Fever and Uno, as well as some SpongeBob games. Those were the days. Unfortunately, by this time, smartphones had started to become a lot more popular towards casual gamers. This would cause players to drop, and by March of 2013, Game Lounge would officially be shut down, and sadly, no games have been archived, making every game lost media. Honestly, if these games were to ever be found, I'd probably do an entire Let's Play on them because, you know, despite these games playing worse than most games, they were a core childhood memory for me. I'm I'm pretty sure many of you are familiar with who Ted Turner is. He's often regarded as one of the most influential pioneers of cable television, having launched some of the most iconic networks of all time. By 1984, Turner had cemented his position as a leader in cable programming with the launch of TBS, CNN, and Headline News, and was looking to expand his empire into music. Witnessing the massive success of MTV, as well as the launch of other music-based channels at the time such as TNN, CMT, and BET, Turner believed that he could create a channel as big as MTV, and on October 26, 1984, Turner Broadcasting would launch the Cable Music Channel.
You're watching Cable Music Channel, live, 24 hours a day, in stereo.
The story of CMC has often been forgotten about because of how short of an impact it made at all. Lasting only 35 days, this would be the shortest lasting service under the Turner Broadcasting umbrella until 2022, when CNN Plus came and went. While this looked like a blind attempt to capitalize on the MTV craze, the concept of music on TV was not new to Ted Turner. As a matter of fact, he toyed with the idea a full decade before MTV even launched. Before billionaire Ted built the empire you know today, he began his journey with the purchase of WJRJ TV in 1970, which would later become WTCG and eventually WTBS. During the first year, he experimented by airing a music-based program produced by Robert Whitney titled The Now Explosion. This program would be highly successful, yet due to high costs, the program was cancelled just 6 months later. In 1983, TBS would air a late-night program called Night Tracks on Friday and Saturday nights. The block did have some success, lasting until 1992, and it was perhaps this program that inspired Turner to create the Cable Music Channel. When this channel was first announced, it explicitly threw shade at MTV, claiming that the network was a sleazy operation that played dirty videos. CMC asserted that it would refrain from airing anything sexually explicit or degrading to women. Their demographic was also wider, targeting ages 12 to 49 compared to MTV's more youth-centric audience. At its inaugural broadcast, Ted Turner kicked off the network by giving a speech and pushing a red button, shouting, "Take that, MTV." Following that, the network would launch, and its first song would be I Love LA by Randy Newman, a little nudge to where their station was located at. CMC would primarily play soft rock, dance, and pop music, and include artists that weren't heavily featured on MTV such as Willie Nelson, Randy Newman, Stevie Wonder, and Julian Lennon. You can't tell me this is Jeremy Allen White. The reason for its quick dismissal is due to a lot of factors. By 1984, MTV had an iron grip on the music video niche, along with the market being too saturated. Cable providers just weren't too interested in including another music channel to their lineup. They were just too late to the game. The word MTV had become as generic as the word literally is today. It's as if Great Value Cola tried taking on Coke. Some can dream. Another disadvantage that dragged on CMC was their licensing issues, as several major record labels signed exclusive deals to air music videos on MTV before anywhere else. Which goes back to why Cable Music Channel didn't feature the most at the time popular songs. What made it more detrimental to the network was that MTV Networks announced the addition of a new channel launching, which will primarily focus on a much older audience than MTV, basically what CMC was already doing.
He copied my whole fucking flow! Word for word, bar for bar!
This new channel would be Video Hits 1, aka VH1, launched on January 1st, 1985. VH1 would also be included without carriage fees. This was one of the selling points that Ted Turner bragged about since MTV carried them. By late November, the writing would be on the wall, and Turner would announce that CMC would go off the air at the end of the month. This was done following an agreement with MTV Network to purchase certain assets of CMC for $1 million, along with $500,000 in advertising for Turner Networks on MTV stations. Ted Turner said in a statement, quote, "We continue to believe that the Cable Music Channel is a top quality music video service, but we simply have had not enough support from the cable industry for it to become a viable part of our business. We are very disappointed, but we feel that the discontinuation of the service now and the sales arrangement with MTV Networks are in the best interest of the company." It should be noted that even with MTV out of the equation, CMC struggled with its own internal affairs. A TBS spokesperson said in a 1984 Atlanta newspaper that the company intended to spend only $10 to $20 million on the channel, yet it would need $40 to $50 million for this venture to be profitable. Given its short lifespan, estimates suggest that CMC lost about $1.5 million. This might have implied that the network did not receive the full $10 to $20 million budget. This is evidence on the network's lack of bumpers and their decision to cut back on video jockeys in favor of using voiceovers. Now I know some of you may not be old enough to remember the Wild West days of cable TV, myself included, but in the late 70s and early 80s, the landscape was rapidly changing. New networks were emerging and gaining an audience, gradually chipping away from the Big Three's viewership. In response, the three networks would invest in alternative cable channels, but among these ventures, CBS Cable stands out to me as one of the most dysfunctional and unorganized channels ever produced. Surprisingly, it didn't even have to be this way. CBS Cable was a short-lived cable channel launched in 1981, lasting approximately 14 months. At first, I was expecting it to be like a superstation type of channel where it would air reruns of CBS programming, but believe it or not, it was a fine arts channel and featured programs about dancing, theater, opera, the arts. Other similar channels at the time included Bravo and the Arts Channel, which would later become A&E. The book Cultivating the Wasteland, which is where I got most of the information from, thoroughly examines what led to the failure of CBS Cable, and in summary, they just had no clear direction. The idea for CBS Cable originated from Charlotte Skiff Jones. She had thought of the idea of a cultural service and took it to Time Inc. before bringing it to CBS. William Paley, founder and chairman of CBS, had always been interested in this type of channel concept and had instructed her to consult CBS on how they can enter the cable field. In February of 1980, she would present 6 alternative programs to the network, and eventually they settled on the Cultural Service Channel. Not only was William Paley on board, but so was his handpicked successor, Thomas H. Wyman, who had been CBS's president and chief executive since 1980. It was this overwhelming shareholder support that led to the creation of CBS Cable. According to the New York Times, about 60% of its programming would be original, with the rest being imported. Viewers who did watch the network often praised it for never compromising on its programming. William Paley himself even described the channel as, quote, one of the best things CBS ever produced, done beautifully with good taste. At launch, the channel would be considered an instant and enduring success, but due to the channel's focus on fine arts, CBS Cable acquired a stigma as a highbrow elitist network, which hindered its ability to attract a broader audience. But by the fall of 1981, it was clear that the channel was already in trouble and needed more revenue, but little did they know that they were in for a bad time. 1982 overall wasn't a good year for CBS or the economy. Their film division lost $15 million, the records division was declining, and approximately 1,500 people were laid off. CBS was also embroiled in a $120 million lawsuit due to a documentary that aired on the main channel in early 1982. Even without considering these challenges, CBS Cable faced internal struggles that ultimately led to its demise. One of the biggest blunders was that they saw cable ad revenues the same way they would have for broadcast advertising. I'm really not gonna pretend like I know what I'm talking about, but basically cable and broadcast television had different methods of advertising. Broadcast goes in a broader reach, whereas cable goes for a more targeted audience. It's kind of the reason why you see toy commercials on Kids TV and
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell
on Fox. So when the question came to what is the market for cultural cable, that's when the problems arose. Even when potential buyers showed interest, many of them were put off by the excessive high prices, which were about 5 times the ordinary rate. This lack of sales led to internal conflicts and debates about whether CBS Cable should switch to a paid channel model, similar to HBO, but was ultimately rejected. They would also explore forming joint ventures with other companies like Bravo, 20th Century Fox, HBO, and Columbia Pictures, but those would never materialize. It was also said in the book that CBS fucked up with the way they transmitted their signal. Rather than Satcom 3, which was the satellite most commonly used by cable systems, they used WeStar. This meant that cable systems couldn't receive the channel unless they provided the necessary equipment to receive the correct signal. Looking at all these setbacks, it's estimated that CBS Cable lost $30 million by the end of 1982. Eventually, the channel was subsequently shut down, and the cause for its demise was attributed to weak leadership and financial mismanagement. Perhaps if they'd done their homework, they would have had a fighting chance.
The American people hear about a firearm only when it's been involved in a crime. And Gun TV has given us a way to reach into those living rooms of every man and woman in this country and let them know there is a true American that loves guns.
Gun TV. Okay, this one's unusual. I'm not gonna lie, before going into Gun TV, I was expecting this to be some conservative pro-NRA propaganda network, but it actually turns out to be quite the opposite. Gun TV was a shopping channel where viewers could purchase firearms and relatable consumer goods. The founders, Doug Bornstein and Valerie Castle, envisioned the channel as a platform for gun companies to advertise their guns and provide detailed analysis of the items. It's worth mentioning that purchasers didn't receive firearms directly. Instead, they were shipped to federally licensed dealers who conducted background checks on buyers. So yeah, you couldn't just simply order a Glock 19 with overnight shipping.
This is a gun, and I want to be really specific here. This is a gun that you only use to shoot bad people. Are we clear?
Despite the channel's questionable subject matter, the channel's hosts prided themselves on being proud gun owners, and it seemed like they had good intentions in providing information and social responsibility about firearms, rather than trying to push some political agenda. Gun TV was slated to launch in 2015 but ended up facing setbacks, pushing its debut to January 2016 and later again to April. Initially, it was going to be a 24/7 network, but it would be relegated to air during the late hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. It also had a website to livestream the channel's signal. However, the timing for Gun TV's announcement couldn't have been worse. Filmed in Coachella Valley, the announcement in November 2015 was followed by the San Bernardino attacks just 2 weeks later, which resulted in the deaths of 16 people and 24 injuries. Given that Coachella Valley is only an hour away from San Bernardino, this tragic coincidence made the announcement of the channel appear tone deaf to a more significant issue that is still unfolding to this day. In January of 2017, Valerie Castle announced that Gun TV will be pulling back on operations while it looked at distribution options. They added on to say that this was simply a business decision and that they are confident of airing again later in the future. Although the last time Gun TV was active on their YouTube channel, it was 7 years ago, and their website seems to be down, so it's unlikely that we'll hear from them anytime soon. Personally, I believe this channel was doomed from the start. While the information and education on gun safety is somewhat reliable, the idea of a gun shopping network emerging at a time when gun violence is at an all-time high sounds like the last thing that we need. Here we have one of the most interesting channels for me growing up, Spike TV. Many who watch this channel might remember this for one thing or another, whether it was mixed martial arts or the bizarre way people lost their lives. Spike TV was indeed one of a kind. But before we get to what Spike was, we should give a quick history from its past. Spike TV was initially launched as the Nashville Network back in 1983. It was launched by WSM Incorporated, a radio station located in Nashville, Tennessee. Shortly thereafter, it was sold to Gaylord Entertainment. The channel originally broadcast country music videos and country-themed variety shows such as game shows, talk shows, and bull riding. In 1991, Gaylord would purchase Country Music Television, otherwise known as CMT. This now meant that they owned two of the biggest country-based channels. With this new acquisition, TNN programming would go in a new direction. Music programming would get pushed to CMT, whereas TNN would expand beyond music and include more shows such as outdoor sports, fishing, and auto racing. Basically, it's Redneck Central. CBS would soon get into the picture and purchase TNN from Gaylord in 1988. And with this acquisition, the network started changing altogether. Slowly, it would phase out all country-based shows and drop the Nashville Network name in favor of more extreme shows, including ECW on TNN, Roller Jam, and acquire male-focused shows such as the Dukes of Hazzard and Dallas. I think you could start to see the early traces of what would eventually become Spike TV. TNN would change hands in ownership once again when Viacom purchased CBS in 2000 for $35.6 billion, making it one of the largest media acquisitions at the time. This management shakeup would now put TNN under the leadership of MTV Networks. It was at this point where TNN as you knew it was dead. To reflect this change, TNN would rebrand itself as the National Network and refer itself as the new TNN. They would also acquire WWF Raw, becoming the network's flagship show, replacing ECW. Considering that this was during the height of the Attitude Era, this was seen as a massive win for the network. There was also XFL programming, but I'm sure you know how that went. Things would take a transformative shift when Albie Heck, the former head of Nickelodeon, became head of TNN in 2003. Under his leadership, he would take the network into a new era. In April of that same year, TNN announced that it would rebrand to Spike TV, the first network for men. This new shift in programming would introduce male-focused shows such as The Joe Schmo Show and MXC, and even introduced an animation block, which included Gary the Rat, Stripperella, and the infamous Ren and Stimpy Adult Party cartoon. This new name was set to debut on June 16, yet the plans would be halted after filmmaker Spike Lee filed an injunction against Viacom to the New York Supreme Court. Surprisingly, Lee would be granted the injunction and TNN would be barred from using the Spike TV name. Despite this setback, TNN would push forward with the new lineup and temporarily dub itself as the first network for men, with the TNN name slowly being phased out. They would also comment on the situation by airing a bumper letting viewers know that they still couldn't use the name just yet.
We're the first network for men. Due to a New York state ruling, we can't announce our name at this time. Stay tuned.
But I want it now!
Fortunately, Lee and Viacom would reach an agreement and would be allowed to use the Spike TV name.
Important dates in men's history. December 17th, 1903, Wright brothers fly something. July 20th, 1969, some guy on the moon. Or something. August 11, 2003, Spike TV, the first network for men, is launched.
During its first few years, the channel would be mocked by news outlets and critics alike, labeling it as lowbrow programming for relying heavily on sexual appeal and violence. By 2005, they would tone it down a bit on the sex appeal, but emphasize more on violence by making it a core staple of the channel. When they had signed a deal with the UFC for original programming, new shows would premiere for the network like UFC Fight Night and the critically acclaimed reality series The Ultimate Fighter. This move would be successful for both parties involved, as it would help elevate Spike TV and UFC to the mainstream. It might sound a bit crazy, but back in 2005, the UFC was not as popular or respected as it is now. So Spike really hit gold with this move. Sadly, Spike would lose WWE programming as it would move back to USA Network. So to fill the wrestling void, TNA Impact would join the lineup. To give it a more action-oriented vibe, Spike TV would introduce a new logo, dropping the TV out of its name and using the tagline, "Get More Action." Following this, Albie Heck would be gone from the network, and Kevin Kay would be here to replace him. Under his leadership, he would take Spike to new levels of infamy when new shows like Mansers and 1,000 Ways to Die premiered in 2007 and 2008. I don't remember Mansers because I was more busy watching, but 1,000 Ways to Die was on all the time when they weren't airing UFC shows. One of the deaths that scarred me for life was something about some dude who died because he was like huffing his own shit from a bucket. Like why are you doing this? 2012 onwards to me signaled the beginning of the end for Spike, as longtime fans would know it. Many of Spike's popular shows were starting to come to an end around this time, and the channel was starting to shift towards more reality-based shows such as Bar Rescue and Ink Master. And while I'm always up for binge-watching episodes of Bar Rescue, it became clear that Spike's days as the unapologetically masculine network were long gone. Things would get worse for Spike as they would lose the rights to UFC programming and switch to Bellator MMA. And while nothing is wrong with Bellator, it was a notable downgrade to what they previously had. Furthermore, pro wrestling would leave the network entirely after 16 plus years by the end of 2014. As the mid-2010s rolled along, cable started going on a massive decline, and while viewership was down, the viewership was much lower compared to their competitors. It was clear that fewer people were watching the network, and in 2016, it was decided that Spike would once again change its viewership focus to better include male and female audiences. This new move would introduce a new logo and a tagline, "The Ones to Watch." This new era of Spike introduced new shows like Lip Sync Battle and a mini-series titled Tut. Tut would be a huge hit for the network, and while it had mediocre reviews, it was a massive draw for the network, drawing more than 1.4 million viewers during its 3-episode run. A few miniseries and documentaries would be made for the network, but as the years continued, Spike's lineup would mostly be reality TV reruns and MMA. Finally, in February of 2017, Viacom CEO Bob Bakish announced that Spike would be rebranded to the Paramount Network beginning in 2018, as part of a new restructuring plan within Viacom, which included the network's office moving from New York to LA. But before Spike TV went off the air, over on Twitter, the person managing the Spike Twitter account would go on a fake meltdown and just say whatever was on his mind before the account got nuked. Well, since I'm out of here anyway, I might as well tell you all the things I've been holding in for the past 18 years. Brace yourself, bros, shit's about to get real. There's a reason all our early shows were CSI, UFC, TNA, MXC, UTI. No one around here knew how to read. When we greenlit TNA, we thought we were buying something entirely different, but wrestling turned out to be okay. The Get More Action tagline was actually my personal mantra. I was in a 3-month dry spell. I honestly thought Catch a Contractor was a show about STDs. The Church of Scientology kicked me out. Sit with that a moment. I was baked when I pitched the 1,000 Ways to Die. Those episodes are mostly based on my nightmares. I'd like to leave my collection of leather wrist cuffs to that special half-pint brawler. You know who you are. My favorite number is 329 because it's the number of times Cops is on every night. I learned from Cops that the best way to get out of a speeding ticket is to have something illegal in your car. I'm not sure how to get out of that felony charge though. I gave my entire staff empty gift cards as parting gifts because f*** them in their joy! I clonked the 4th stall in the 7th floor men's room over 30 times last year. I lost my virginity in one of the storage spaces from auction hunters. I was extremely disappointed when Stripperella had no nudity. I aired that show solely based off the name and the potential for frontal. I never thought rebranding would be one of the 1,000 Ways to Die. I'm out. Peace! Moment of silence, everyone. Today, the Paramount Network now stands on Spike TV's place. The channel is most known for Yellowstone, which has become the network's flagship series, and while the TV channel for Spike is gone, Spike now exists as a network on Pluto TV and returns to its roots as a male-focused channel. Before I end this topic, I have a suggestion for whoever made 1,000 Ways to Die. Can you reboot the show and have it entirely based on TikTok devs? I just want to see a recreation of the Milk Crate Challenge. That's all I want. Thanks. And that's a wrap for the first episode of Discontinued Nostalgia. I hope you guys found this as interesting as I did researching it, and if not, well, goddamn, this was a waste of time. Anyways, announcement time. We will finally be releasing a Nickelodeon video. Sort of. We will be splitting the video into 2 parts. With the conversation around Nickelodeon at an all-time high, I really wanted to present the video into 2 parts, detailing every aspect of the network. I hope to have it released by the end of April, if not the first week of May. As for part 2, it should be out by the end of spring, so yeah, expect it sooner rather than later. Anyways, that's really all I have to say. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe if you want me to cover other topics. Until next time guys, I am out.